What do you use for your video on YouTube and stuff like that?
Oh, just the phone.
No way.
Yeah, there's no like I am yeah, I'm super low. Well, well, I can even tell it in the story, just like for content stuff. I had a 6. I mean, I'm an old guy, so I went from a 6 to a 12.
An iPhone 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how it's when I started Stumptown, officially in, when we with the move to Montana. So like that was all the first content was just the 6, but I did notice a difference when I went to the 12, like from uptick in presentation.
Yeah.
Like people were seeing, I was able to take better pictures, which conveyed whatever, that you want and stuff.
I've heard, well, there's a lot to unpack in even that little story, because I've heard that specifically for Instagram and Shorts, it's almost preferred by the algorithm to use like consumable content, I guess, like digestible content. It makes it feel more casual to use your phone camera as opposed to some $10,000 camera, if that makes sense. So I've heard that that's actually good.
I wouldn't doubt if there's whatever sensors or whatever encryption on any kind of editing software that Instagram is well aware of when it pulls over where essentially you're manufacturing or what you're using, and like there's probably all that data collected, I would assume.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's biased. I don't know if it's like, hey, they say, we're not going to take it from this person or something.
Yeah, and I also feel like it's worth mentioning, we might as well just go ahead and start with this. When I was starting the podcast, this is what a lot of people do when we are starting a new endeavor, specifically like you're starting a YouTube channel or an Instagram channel and stuff like that. We create these walls that are so high. It's like, well, I can't do that because I don't have a nice camera, or I don't have a nice mic. I can't start a podcast. You don't need much, right? Like you just got to start.
I think that's 100% true. I think I find, I do it. I still do it. I still do it now, like in, whether I have an idea, like I have an old phone, I have the old iPhone 6 I could still be using as a camera. It's still good. And like, times where I think like, if I was going to shoot this, I'd want really 2 shots of this, and then I'd have to set it up. Like it's. I mean, on some respect, I guess it's sort of lazy, and like I'm saying I'm lazy about it. And then you have your excuse matrix, and you try and bolster your excuse matrix with like, well, I am the only one in the shop, and and I do actually have to get this thing done. And anytime you're filming something, you're infinitely slower. Mm-hmm. Because you're like, oh, look at this angle, and I'll get this angle. It's because I'm finding that the edits are extremely important, right? Like, so it's in that sort of, they say it's storytelling, but it's not. Like, to me, it's not really that great of storytelling. It's like this edit. It's more like production value. Like, how do you get ink out production value out of a tiny short, and all those like different angles and steps. You're like, something that takes 45 seconds ends up taking 20 minutes to shoot,
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
And it's a pain in the ass. Like, if I had some intern, like that was just sitting around like, all right, man, just film this, do this, and I'll just keep on going, we'll get it. If we don't get it, I'll do it again on this one over here. It would be nice, but that's not the reality.
Well, yeah, we can touch on that later on your plans for Stumptown Axes, and like even I'm curious to hear if you have any interest in doing something like that with an intern or anything like that. On that note, though, I've heard and seen some like creator workshops, I guess is what you could call, where they have like 6 different cameras already set up, already exactly where they need to be, so it makes the editing process a little bit easier. But I've always found it fascinating, or at least interesting, when somebody's making something like you just said. You do have to press record, then you have to go over there, then you have to press stop, then you have to move the camera, then you have to press record. So I'm sure in terms of efficiency, that's not optimal, but it also allows you to do what you've done on Instagram and YouTube, which is grow exponentially.
Yeah, I think some of it's a trap. And I'm, like again, I'm self-confessing. I guess this is like, a confession studio here. But, like I'm confessing that you get stuck in some of these same traps though. So like I find that I'm, filming, especially on the YouTube side, because I saw success with something, a style of film, and doing a single process to an axe. And now I find myself filming it a lot, and like, I'm kind of bored of it. I think there's still some in it left, like to get the perfect edit. And that's kind of a fun game, right? Like you're like, how do I nail this? How do I really like capture this or recreate it? And you can't obsess about it in a way that like is unproductive, but it's fun to obsess about in a challenge point. But yeah, like filming something new, a step is like it's a much higher threshold when you have these successes with like, oh, I'm going to go to my go-to play. You're like, well, it's winning.
Yeah.
It's getting eyes, and there's always new eyes coming into, especially on the YouTube side, which grows. We can talk about the Instagram side is really strange to me now, in its current form, but the YouTube side always gets new viewers. So it's there's constantly people getting attracted, and the shelf life of those shorts, are, not unironically, is short. Like, it's populated for a while. Like I find like the formula is sort of like if it's good for 2 to 3 weeks, and I say good if it's getting like consistent numbers and it's hitting, it's getting your likes, it's getting your views that are above normal, and then as long as you're in some sort of maintained period of watch or whatever they call it. Actually, I can't even think of what the hell the metric is. But there's 3 main metrics. I'm sure there's a 1,000 more that YouTube experts could explain, but like those are the 3 that come up on the dashboard. And if it's good for like 3 weeks, it's almost like then, okay, we're going to give you a shot at this bigger population, and whatever happens in that early markers there will then determine. Like, there's one, I think it's almost exactly 3 weeks old now, and it's on a little bit of a run. It's like it didn't start on fire like, some have maybe, but it's just been this slow burning. I mean, you can look at the chart, and then something happened at week 2, and they opened it up to, it's not like, Taylor Swift saw this and then she liked it and reposted, like it's not, I don't know why they open them up unless it's just like over time it performs well enough. And then like, now it's like sitting at 500,000 views, but it's no different. And it's just like, it's sad to admit, it's no real different than the 3 before it. Right. There's some sort of difference. And I do say like, oh, how do I get this edit? Right. Like, there is a philosophy behind like editing down and dumbing it down. Like there's times where, like, in what I'm describing, people can go onto Stumptown Axes YouTube page and see like, and sort in the short section, you'll see a repetitive thing where I'm driving a wedge into an axe and I'm filming the steps and then I'm cleaning it up to make it look pretty. And you'll see, there's probably 20 of the same exact thing. Now they're all filmed slightly different. I've tried different things, and even embellished part of it. Right, like this isn't exactly how I do it. I'm not sitting it always in a vise, and I'm not like. It's kind of like, like you'll see me whack it, down. It's like, well, I stopped filming and I'm like, oh, I'll look at it closer. I'm like, okay, it needs a couple more hits, but I'm not going to film that, right? It doesn't further the story. And that's kind of fun to explore too, like where, you're in a content creation mode or something and you're like, is it authentic? Well, I'm really doing it. And this is really going out to a customer. But am I, like I'll use sandpaper sometimes to show, hey, this is what I'm doing. But I rarely like sand it with sandpaper, right? I'm using an orbital sander, which I'll show on some too. And but the you do embellishments like that, and some that sometimes I think they work. Sometimes there's a whether it's sound, because like partly like I think sandpaper sounds way better than an orbital sander. Like I got to turn down the volume a bunch in the editing side when that
sorry
happens.
For anybody listening, that noise I just made.
Yeah, so we have that, and in some of the first ones were I've done some with just sound where it's like what's the ASMR. Yeah. So it's because there are some good sounds associated with it. Especially there's one like I use this X-Acto knife to kind of pick the pieces that are off the side or whatnot, and but that's something I actually really do. Maybe not as dramatically as in front of the camera as I do, but they in some way it's all the real stuff I do. It's just I'm trying to present it in a way, and you look at like super big accounts that like I think it's Dr. Restoration is one that does these phenomenal films that are like very dramatic, mostly sped up, but they're long format, which is
he the one who wears those gloves.
He might have gloves.
There's some guy on YouTube I've seen do like sandblasting and all these restorations, and he's always wearing gloves, and I'm like, this is for some reason it's tapping into some. I don't even know why I'm watching this. It's like a 20-minute video, and I'll watch the whole thing, and it's like it's tapping into some hardwired neurological thing. And before we get too far into it, I want to provide some context. I mean, people should already know you make axes, Stumptown Axes, but I want to say firstly, thank you for coming on, Paul. This is really cool, kind of the story of how this came to be, and I'll share that in a little bit. But thank you for coming on.
Sure.
Yeah, this is. I'll go ahead and say it now. So basically, I was in Black Rifle Coffee Company store in Kalispell. I walk in, and the first thing that I saw on the wall was the axes, and I'm like, I walked right to them. Didn't even go get coffee. I was like, holy cow, these are some of the coolest axes I've ever seen. Asked the guy at the store how much they were. They weren't selling. He gave me your information on like YouTube and stuff like that. So I looked you up, and I'm like, yeah, I want to talk to this guy. So here we are. I also have to say, for anybody that's listening and just you, it's one of the best beards I've seen. So I think it's the best beard on the podcast thus far.
Okay, good. It's a lot more like Santa Claus than it used to be. Unfortunately, when I was your age, it was probably a little bit, it was a little bit closer to your color.
Yeah, I just need to get the length down. I mean, that's pretty serious. But yeah, so the way I like to start every podcast, I mean, we already got into it, which I love, but just more context for me and maybe even an exercise for yourself. But like, who is Paul Flanagan, right? Like, who is Stumptown Axes? How did you get to where you are now from where you were being however far back you want to go?
Yeah, well, I'd say that's too broad of a question. Who am I? I guess, like what I would tell people is you're always going to be figuring that out. And I don't know if I necessarily identify with, am I Stumptown Axes? Is my heart and soul into it? Yeah, sure it is. But is that who I am? No. Are we on some constant discovery of who we are? Sort of. Like, as ridiculous as it sounds, like the older I get, like the more I'm like, I don't know, getting more like a hippie or something. But Stumptown started officially with a move to Montana. I live in Whitefish, Montana, which is about, I think it's 15 miles north of Kalispell, where you visited. We're right up against, it's a ski, resort town. And, we have Whitefish Lake, and it's it's an absolutely beautiful place to be. The axes, and it's mainly axe handles. I don't, just to be clear with folks, I don't forge heads. I collect vintage heads, and sometimes restore them. Sometimes they're in great shape, but I make hand make handles for them. And I would say this: it started in Washington. I guess I'm a military kid. So I traveled a lot with my dad, who was in Air Force for 33 years. So we moved around a lot. So there's not really I don't really have a hometown, but I normally tell people I'm from Virginia because I lived there the longest. And
what part of Virginia, if you don't mind me asking? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, Hampton Roads area. So in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Williamsburg, you know,
Yeah,
that
I went to Virginia Tech played baseball at Virginia Tech for my first 4 years, graduated from there, and then went to VCU. So know a lot
Oh,
of people
nice. Oh,
from that
yeah.
area. Yeah.
You know exactly the area then. Yeah. And I don't miss it. I don't miss it at all.
No, definitely not.
The
Montana's a lot
humidity.
better than that place.
And my wife is Navy. She was a fighter pilot for, I guess she was active for 11 years, and then reservist, and then just recently retired. But we took a move. She took a job in Washington State, and we moved out. When I was in Norfolk, I had a bicycle shop that I ran for 11 years. And prior to moving, I had closed that. It had, that's kind of a deeper dive. But I would say it was mildly successful. I mean, we made it 11 years, and I could never crack the code of real estate. And if people wanted advice on retail in particular, you're to have to crack the code on real estate, on either getting a sweet deal or having margins or products that can battle that real estate nut. But it wasn't a disaster closing, which is I am extremely thankful for. I had a great partner in it that I think how we did it. It's one of the best business moves I think I made, and how we closed, how quickly, and it could not have been a better outcome. And of course, I learned a ton while I was doing 11 years of running a shop, and you learn a lot. But in some ways, you're also we talked about you're in this static as far as development. You're learning stuff, but you're also not pushing per se. So we moved to Washington, and I was like, hey, great, this is not a mecca, but is certainly a centrally located place for the outdoor industry. There's lots of opportunities, lots of headquartered companies in Washington, or certainly adjacent to the Seattle area. And I was like, oh man, like I've been in the outdoor industry for 11 years. Like this should be no problem. Right. And, and like, turns out it was like a big problem. And I think one of the biggest ones is not being able to define what your skills are. If you're an owner operator or an entrepreneur, you could potentially be missing some, and I was some valuable acute skills, right? Like that are, when you're running a smaller company, a smaller retail place, you're doing so many different things, but you're doing like tiny pieces of them, right? And sometimes not even to completion, or you're doing what you need to do to accomplish goals. You're not necessarily mastering something, and there's certainly nobody that's going to judge your performance per se, except the bank and like your landlord if you're not paying. But it's not like a singular person that's a sales relation person or account person that's like looking at spreadsheets, building spreadsheets all day and showing stuff for a client to maximize a list of SKUs, or talk about unproductive inventory or this kind of thing. And I had a tough time defining, I guess, like what I would bring as value. I had probably over valued myself in some ways, but like I thought I could help somewhere, and I think the most important thing is I was willing to start. I sort of understood some of this stuff, and I was like, hey, I'm willing to start at a low level. It's not like I was like, oh, I'm a business owner and I should obviously come in at the top and have my own corner office. I was like, no, I was like, hey, I applied to some of these entry level jobs, and man, I was getting rejected every which way. I mean, and that's, I get it, like job searches. And one, I'd been 11 years out of the job market essentially. So I had no pulse whatsoever on, I'd say not no pulse, but like certainly wasn't completely indoctrinated in some sort of corporate culture. And but I'd like started late to the networking thing, like if I was giving advice, and this would be a side note, advice to folks that own their own businesses and are thinking at some point they're going to get out, work on your network now. Like your network is going to be so important. Like as an owner, there's lots of people, sales reps, account managers, product managers that you're going to be meeting all the time. They're trying to get your business, trying to kiss your ass. And, like you should use that time not to use them, but at least establish a relationship where you're using traditional LinkedIn's, coffee chats, whatever it be. You need to be preserving some of that network that you may rely on later. And, so I was sort of starting from ground zero because I was like, you just didn't have time for it. I didn't have time to say like, oh, I should have a coffee chat with this guy and see who he knows in Seattle or something. And then by the time you're going out of the business, I tell you what, like nobody wants to take your call, like, like they're like, fuck this guy, like now we're not going to get, his account and then, my bonus is affected and all this kind of shit. So with that struggle, it got worse, like, and I had a couple leads, and there was actually I had a lead very early on that it looked really positive, and it's like, I met this company, and it's like I won't get into the company, but it was a very major brand, and I would have loved to fucking work for these guys, and met this guy, like I met them through a fairly creative way with LinkedIn, right? And I'm sure people do this all the time. This was like, not a new thing to me, but like I found that just finding people and emailing them randomly gets you a way to get a conversation going, right? Like it's probably similar, like you DM me, like you just like, hey, screw it. Let me just see if this guy will talk.
The worst thing that could happen is they say no.
Right. That's really an important thing where I have no pride in just asking for something now, but you say, hey, do you know anything about, I see you work such, do you know anything about this job? Like, oh no, you should talk to this guy. Like, oh, okay. And then, you got this permission sort of to use this guy to say, hey, Steve over here told me I should give you a call and we should talk. And you're like, you have that at least a little bit of connection point, now you can talk. But whatever, that didn't work out, and and that was typical. People were telling me, oh, you're going to apply to 100 jobs, and maybe you'll get one call back, and it, it was sort of true in that way, and like the shop closed in a really fast way, which was good. It allowed us to maximize assets within the shops, which were greater than I anticipated. Like there's you have, if you're a shop long enough, you have all these kind of junk drawers of stuff. You end up like with a lot more parts and stuff that you're not utilizing every day, but you like it has value, and it especially has value to like another bike shop, right? These are things that like it takes years to acquire parts bins or whatever to fix stuff with proficiency. Where was I at that? So we're still in Washington. And yeah, like I didn't have a ton of time to like, I don't know, deal with closing the shop and like how that impacted. It was like, all right, close the shop. We're doing this move. And it's like, and that started to unravel. It's like, like it wasn't sadness per se. It wasn't that at all. There's a huge amount of relief, honestly. It's like 11 years. Any small business owner that's not in a fantastic market and that doesn't have a great real estate deal will know the struggles of, especially seasonal. seasonal businesses where you have thin and there's some great innovations I felt like I made, like even paying myself, like I did that seasonally, inverse curve. And I eventually, in the halfway point of our time there, I even developed a seasonal rent agreement with the landlord too, which really helped cash flow. And that's really, I would say those two things really extended our time and caused us not to have to go into an extreme amount of debt, and thus didn't, financially ruin anyone, which I saw people get ruined. Like it's not uncommon that, you try and dig your way out and you borrow more, or you're selling stuff you don't have, and you can get upside down. You can get in a bad way fairly quickly. But there was a frustration. It's like, God damn it, like, why can't I get a job? Like I remember REI's headquarters is in Washington. They were probably, from where I lived, we were in the town of Issaquah, kind of on the outskirts of town. And man, I was like, oh shit, REI's there. Like there's a headquarters right down, I think it was Sumner is a town, or either way, it was like 15-minute drive to their corporate headquarters. And like, it's like a classic outdoor brand company where, they have great cafeterias. They're big on checking out equipment. And like, I'm like, oh man, it's like a great place to possibly work. And they had a bicycle shop merchandiser. So not like in a store. This is like for corporate, like to develop like a merchandising plan. And I want to say it was for like tools and cleaning products.
And you're like, oh wait, this is perfect.
It's just such a mind, like it's not a bike shop. It's not a whole plan for the whole store of the bike shop portion. We're talking like one merchandising section of like, I don't know how many SKUs they had. Let's say it's 500. I don't know, like compared to a whole bike shop, which probably, is in the thousands. Right. And I was like, it was an entry level job. And I was like, hey, this could be a great way, I'll apply for this. And I did get a call. I did get a screening, and I was like, okay, great. Like, yeah, I'd love to. And they're like, yeah, we'll if we decide to bring you in, we'll bring you in and kind of, you'll do this. You'll meet these 3 people possibly. I was like, great, and just like never, just all ghosted on that. And I was like, God damn. I was like, I ran a bike shop. I owned it. I personally, had loans from the bank with my name on it, and dealer agreements, with these major brands. And like, how are you not going to at least want to meet the person that has that? Like
it's an interesting issue that I think a lot of. I'm a young dude, but it makes sense to me because the translatable skills from owning an entire business, like you mentioned, it's kind of a lot of little things that you're good at, that you're proficient at. It's not like that specialized things that corporations are looking for, because most of the time corporate gigs are relatively specialized, whereas owning a business, specifically a retail business, and I'm assuming you're also working on bikes, like you have a broad array of skills. But
most
to
of the
me,
guys would make sure I didn't work on them too much.
Yeah, there you go. That's good.
I wasn't as good a mechanic as my guys that I had working for me.
Well, that's another lesson. But so it sounds like, bike shops, obviously that's a hands-on thing, right? Like that's fixing something, and perhaps even a level of restoration. Looking back, are you surprised that you got into what you're doing now?
No, maybe the exact thing. I'd say there's always been I guess part of me that liked to work on things, even from a young age. There's I love to take stuff apart. Like I would, I don't know if I don't even think I got in that much trouble, but just like I remember taking a clock radio apart, and this would have been, in the 80s. For some reason I had, like, my dad had some speaker wire, or actually I don't even know if it was speaker wire, it was just wire. And I was like, oh, I'm going to remove this speaker out of this thing, and I'm going to connect this wire and move it closer to my bed. So when I go to sleep, knowing I basically destroyed this clock, and I didn't really know how to put it back together, but like, here's this speaker hanging out, and I enjoyed that. And though I wasn't a fantastic mechanic, especially in comparison to my service manager and the guys that work for me, I did enjoy working on bikes, and I worked on my own bike, and I was a proficient proficient mechanic. I just wouldn't classify myself as a master mechanic, because it's there's a big difference when you know what you're looking for between somebody that knows what they're doing at a very high level versus
it's a microcosm
just
of that corporate that we were talking about. It's kind of like the other end. Like you were the corporation for those guys, that the corporation was for you, because like you have all these broad things you have to care about. All you need from them is to be really, really good at this one thing, which is fixing bikes. Kind of the same deal.
Yeah, but it's still shocking. I was like, look, this is such a minor job, and it's like what they were looking for was not that specialized. It was like, you're going to be a merchandiser, like I did this all the time. But I would just be intellectually curious if I was a hiring manager, be like, well, hey, what's this guy's story? Like, maybe I can get a couple tips on, you know, like even if I interview him just to get some ideas, for this other person I want to hire or something, like maybe, or maybe pass them along to some other part of the thing. I'm like, like bike shops and REIs in particular are like pretty soulless places. I mean, a lot of bike shops today are pretty soulless places, honestly, because that's sort of what works with a corporate backing now. But it bothered me. And then to continue on, so this goes on and on. And like at some point I'm like, Jesus, like, is it me? Like, and of course it is, like to some degree it's definitely me lacking the skills or the presentation or the ability to make somebody see some story. And there wasn't great feedback. And I don't know if there was like I think a lot of these hiring managers didn't understand. They had never, owned a business themselves. So they were in some ways intimidated, in some ways thought like, oh, this guy's not going to be able to work for me because he's used to working for himself. That was a very common assessment from like friends, right? And so I would assume that kind of carried on to what the hiring managers were probably thinking. That was a common thought. Which I didn't think was true at all. I mean, maybe I'm a stubborn person, but like not any more than another stubborn person, I guess. And I wanted to work. I was like, I want to work for somebody and, advance these skills. But it kept on getting rejections. And eventually, like anyone, you're human, you start taking it personal. And it's hard to remove those feelings. And it kept getting worse, and I got down and, I don't know what, I don't know what depression really is. I have ideas of what it is. And, but I know my self-worth was slowly eroding. I know, physically, I was still like hiking and doing a lot of outdoor stuff, which was helpful, but I actually think the weather in Seattle was slowly affecting me too.
Seasonal effectiveness disorder, that's a real thing, man.
Yeah, I'm sure they talk about it. Like Seattle's one of the highest, and it probably for a number of fucking reasons, but like it's one of the highest medicated areas I think in the country, if I'm not mistaken.
Not surprising to me at all to hear that.
It's probably a number of reasons for that, not just the weather, but I'm sure weather is a factor. And man, I was getting angry and I was getting bitter. And I'm sure on some level, some of that was coming out in later interviews or whatnot, even though I was still hopeful. And, you just feel worthless. You're like, I had this business, I had this self-worth, and maybe the identity was probably too wrapped up in what I was doing. And, a good friend, my good friend, Mark, who's a psychology major, introduced me to, which I'm sure tons of young people, like young males, have heard, is Jordan Peterson. And, I started listening to some of his stuff, and I found it immensely helpful. And I started, and I think I've given the advice to lots of people now, but I think I bastardized his thing, which was like take 15 minutes, because I was getting into a place where, it was pretty dark, like I was, I guess like self-harm was on the table and all these kinds of things, because you really start convincing yourself that you're more useful not being there, that maybe a pity story for your kids to look at and say, like, have this hardship is actually going to be more valuable than what you could give them, which is, I think is patently false, but it's something you start to convince yourself, or potentially convince yourself. And so I started taking 15 minutes, and it was it's a technique I don't really have to use anymore, because I'll explain. I can kind of expand it a lot further, but I was literally having, to take 15-minute time intervals and say, I'm going to do something positive. I'm going to what can I do in the next 15 minutes? And I'm going to look around this house or try and do something that's good. Do I owe somebody a phone call that I've sort of been putting off? Oh shit, the trash is down at the bottom of the driveway. Let me go pick up the trash. And that's a check mark, right? Like that's something I can check off a list in a positive way. Let's empty the dishwasher. And it's like literally tasks this small, and try not to get angry, and try not to get, yell or something, yell at a kid, or, and then if you fail at those, you start over at that 15 minutes, and you say, hey, the fact that I'm starting over, you need to sort of forgive yourself for that last 15-minute failure. You're stepping back up to the plate. I think you said, I think I read on your thing, the man in the arena, you're willing to go up to bat again and fail again. So let's forget about that last 15 minutes, maybe learn something from it. Let's take it. And that turns into, all right, I've strung these together now. Maybe I can go half a day without getting pissed off or feeling sorry for myself. Meanwhile, I'm accomplishing things, right? And they're small, but it does have a snowballing effect. And then you start to get the, courage or gumption to take on bigger projects, right? You create this space, and next thing you know, you've had 3 days, and then, oh fuck, man, maybe I drank on that fourth day, and so I literally have poison in me, and I'm depressed because I drank a depressant, and but you're like, okay, you know what? Let's start simple again. Let me figure what can I do today? My head's kind of hurting. I'm kind of a little groggy, but I'm not going to give myself a hard time about it. I'm going to start moving in a direction. That led to kind of this fuck you attitude towards, people that wanted to hire me. It's like, you know what? I'm going to do something myself. And I'm going to take them out of the equation, and I'm going to fill in these blanks on some of these jobs that I wanted, or whether it was in marketing or something. I'm going to create a brand. And the first thing I was like, you know what? For some reason, I wanted a sewing machine. And, I used to put on the website and stuff like Stumptown Axes started with a sewing machine, which is sort of true. And so I bought this Husqvarna, still have it, Husqvarna sewing machine. And I was like, I'm just going to create the perfect pair of shorts. And, basically I was like, I'll probably find some pair of shorts I like and then rip it off sort of, and just make it a branding exercise and just see what I can do. If I can, I believe people are fairly indifferent to things, and that marketing drives a ton of what we purchase, why we purchase it, all these, kind of things. And I'll do that. And so I bought the sewing machine as kind of drawing and sketching a few things. And it just, I don't know, it just wasn't into it. Right. And not because I was, depressed or unmotivated. It was just something didn't quite sit right. And, it never took off. But in the meantime, I had saw somebody had done, restored an axe, on Instagram, and I still don't know exactly who the maker was that I saw, but I was like, damn, that looks nice. I mean, that's like something about that just resonated. And I was like, man, like, I wonder if I could do that. And for those that don't know, Washington's a massive logging history. And, where I lived in Issaquah is like very close to Tiger Mountain. And it's logging is the history of logging is all around you. And these, like you'll still see the stumps of old growth, massive sequoias and Doug firs. And on the hills and mountains around, you'll still see cables that are half buried that were used for logging operations when they just scoured and clear cut, large sections of a whole mountain without regard for, the fact that these are going to take 300 years to repopulate. And so finding vintage stuff, and I'd always had like a fascination, I think, with a lot of people with like the industrial age, old world, forging and steel. You look at that stuff with reverence, right? Because it's just simply really not done that much anymore. And I was like, I want to try and do this. And I've told people, I was like, I don't know why I thought I could, but I was like, because I don't have any woodworking background whatsoever. And I was like, all right, well, I'll go on Craigslist. I'm going to buy this head. And I got to figure out, I think, looking up stuff is like, okay, hickory is the wood, and okay, where can I buy hickory? And luckily there's a great place in, south of Seattle, that had a great selection. So I bought I said, hey, like, I don't know what I'm buying. Like, hey, I need it about this thick. And of course the people are annoyed with you because mostly, there's tradesmen or hobbyists that know what the hell they're doing in there. And I'm like, oh, I just need this piece, maybe 30 inches long or something. And I get a piece of hickory and I bring it home. I don't have a bandsaw, but a neighbor did. And I just, the axe I bought had a handle on it. And I was like, I'll just recreate this. And it was busted. So like, it made sense. It wasn't like I was like, oh, I'll just tear this apart and make my own. And I traced it and I had a neighbor cut it out for me. And, God, it took me forever because all I had was, I bought just the cheapest draw knife. And a draw knife, for those, I guess listening, it's just like a sort of like a piece of metal that's sharp on one side, and you literally pull and shave.
Where you go like this kind of?
Correct.
Like pull it towards yourself?
That's right.
Okay.
And really, all I use that for now is shaping the eye or the tongue, which is the handle part is the tongue, and the eye is on the actual axe head. But I had so much material on the piece that like now I use a bandsaw and I cut that way slimmer before I even start doing anything, but I didn't know at the time. And I don't think I watched that many YouTube videos. I mean, I probably watched a couple, and slowly but surely, probably it had to be a month of moving on this thing. And it wasn't like continuous. I wasn't working on it every single day. And I got a piece of like, which I still wish I could get, was this Brazilian rosewood. They had a scrap there. This is one of the most beautiful wedges I ever had, was like, is wood I got the very first time I went to this place, because it polished up it looked like luxury furniture. And, the wedging of it is, what I take those YouTube videos of is like a crucial or an interesting side of it for viewers, for sure. And, I made the first axe, and I was like, and if I looked at it today, I'd still be like, that's not half bad. I mean, it looks like shit. Don't get me wrong. Like it's a terrible handle, but like it's all the right. It's very usable. Of course, I gave it to I gave it to a friend who still has it and has subsequently basically destroyed it. Which I'll probably have to get a trade going with him just to reclaim the first official handle. Because just overstriking and missing and just tearing the shit out of it, which is hilarious. But it's meant to be used. It's wood.
Yeah.
And but it's still tight on the head, so it's like the very first one never loosened up. You know, I took a lot of care in and driving that wedge to secure it. And I was like, I think I could do this again. And you know, like anything, you're terrible the first times you do something. And you know, back to Peterson and other people too, is like anytime you start something. And here I am, I guess I'm 40 at the time, 41 at the time, and I'm learning something that is not useful in today's world. like here I am, I'm gonna spend some time learning something that I'm gonna be terrible at, because if you're gonna start something new, you're gonna be shit at it. You know, unless it's really easy, then anyone can do it, and you know it's probably not worth maybe your time. But you know, like something told me to just keep on doing it, and the next one was half the time. Then, the fourth one was, maybe a quarter of the time, and it was starting to look better too. I was like, oh man, like, okay. And then, like a friend, you're posting this on my personal Instagram page, and a friend was like, oh man, can you make me one? He's like, yeah. It felt nice to be needed, like, yeah, I'll make you one. And, then a friend of a friend was like, well, how much are those going for? I was like, oh, you want to buy them? And I was like, oh, yeah. I was like, I don't know. Like, so the first couple, God, I sold, and for good reason. They're sold for next to nothing. Because I didn't want to sell some of them at first either, because I was like, this still doesn't feel completely right. And, eventually I got a bandsaw. And so then, like, a lot of things changed with, the first, pro level, I guess, tool that you're really cutting time down. And you're slowly learning nuances stuff. You're getting excited about getting better at something, and you're putting more time, more effort. You're meeting folks in the maker community because, maybe by like the 10th one, a couple people, and, COVID hits, and we end up moving to Montana during that period. My wife was already working remotely while we were in Washington for a company that was in Washington, but they didn't have a problem at the time with her moving. And I was like, Washington was kind of crazy during COVID, especially the Seattle area.
Yeah.
And the kids, I have 3 kids, and they were all young. Well, they're still young, but God, what did I have? I had like a kindergartner and a second grader, and it was terrible for them. Like to sit on a computer all day. Always, like I couldn't do anything with axes, because like one would be sitting over in one corner and I'd be in the other, and there's always technical difficulties with one or the other. And so I would just sort of sit there reading a book, waiting till one or the other needed a help with sort of an assignment because there was some technical problem. It was terrible. And we started to look at places to move to, and eventually we landed in Whitefish here, which is one of the best decisions I think as a family we've made, because we just the kids have thrived, and it's just a beautiful place. But I
was gonna say it sucks. I definitely don't think anybody else should move to Whitefish. It's not it's a fun place. It's hideous.
I couldn't move to Whitefish now either. If in full disclosure, with what happened to real estate, there's not a chance our family would live here. Even 3 months after we moved here, there's not a chance.
And I want to touch on something that you mentioned a while ago, man. I'm so pumped that I just let you go on that riff, because I didn't even know where that was going.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt.
No, I'm so glad that you just spoke about that, and I really want to focus on that. But the Montana thing, I was just there, like I mentioned. We went down. We were in Missoula. We went up to Whitefish a couple times, and then we stayed in some really cool Airbnb outside of Kalispell. But my dad has some colleagues in Missoula, and they're all like, all their friends from wherever they're from. They ask, like, "How's Missoula?" And they're like, it's not that cool. You should definitely go to Bozeman if you're going to come up here. Definitely move to. You should definitely go somewhere other than Missoula, because what I've realized is that places like Montana, and I'm curious to hear if you had this same experience. But that was the first time I'd been there as an adult, and you can't even describe it. Like something, like it's just different. Like something just occupies your mind. You're just in a different state of being. It's just so incredibly vast and beautiful that, especially as a man, for me, it just feels different. So I'm curious if that's something that you experienced.
Well, I'd say there's complexities, I guess, to speak to Montana. You know, I've only lived here for 3 years, so I don't know how qualified well, I'm not qualified to completely speak, but I can, speak to my opinions, I guess. I love the West, and Montana, I think, is a great representation of the West, the Mountain West, I guess, more descriptive. And there's something about the maybe the rawness of the proximity. Like I live in town. I can walk to. It's funny, like a lot of friends that I've had like over the years. One in particular, I remember he asked me when he first found. He's like, "How far is your post office? Just from your house?" And I was like, well, it's like it's a mile, like the post office is closed. Like the grocery store is closer. Like I lived in, when I lived in Norfolk, Virginia, I was like, like to get to a Lowe's, even though, here it's, 20 miles away or whatever it is. I can get to it quicker than I could when it was 7 miles away in Norfolk because like traffic, like there's no, in the summertime, obviously we get a lot more traffic. And then like, at the end of the ski day, coming off the mountain, there's a bunch of, there's traffic. Not like anyone that's ever been in a city would call traffic, but what a local would call traffic, and it's annoying. But I think there's something definitely that resonates with Montana. You have a lot of different, there's interesting legacies that are here. There's, and they're in conflict with a lot of the people that have moved here, and I'm certainly empathetic to the strife. Some of it, falls on deaf ears for me because, I was a military kid. I was a new person everywhere I went. So like, it's not like anyone like had any love for me anywhere I go, you're always a new person. You're always having to make new friends, and you just made those adjustments. And yeah, like, it's tough for people that have lived here their whole lives and they see people move in. I try not to conclude myself in the category, but like you'll hear the cliches of, Texans and Californians that move to Montana. But I know California. I'm friends with people that are Californians that have moved to Montana. That like one of them is on a hunt right now for elk. It's not, like are people that get second homes moving here to buy a second home? Sure. But like, there's still plenty of people that politically and culturally identify with everything that, like I would say a local Montanan does, and have moved here too. So they're not, I guess it's not all bad. There's certainly in Whitefish acutely, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of third and fourth and probably fifth homers that own properties here. But there's also a town, and is it expensive? Yes. But I live here full time. There's no other houses that I live in. I just wanted to move to a small town and be a part of the community, and raise my kids in a place where we walk to the bus in the morning. Everyone skis, everyone's outside, raise them where there's a threat of like the real threat of bears around. And, I think that does something. And, it's unfortunate because the main problem with people moving here is the real estate. And that's it. So they'll say like the wealth disparity or, quote unquote, affordable housing, whatever that means. But like, I'm 45 now. My wife's 43, and we had to save our whole lives to be able to afford to live in a place like this. It wasn't like no other time in my life could I have moved to a place like this. Even before the real estate boom, it would have been.
Unless you're trying to do it like how I may or may not do it in the next couple of years, which is get a van and park my ass next to a damn coffee shop that I work at or something. I don't know. But I want to make two comments on. The first is the traffic. Number one, I made this distinction while I was there because I was like, damn, Dad, we've been driving a lot. Like, honestly, I feel like people in Montana have to drive a lot, but I don't mind it because when I'm driving here, number one, I'm not in traffic. Number two, I'm looking out over different mountain ranges and vast plains. And like you said, I could probably go significantly further in less time than it would take me to get to a place closer to my house in Atlanta in more time. And when I'm driving in traffic in Atlanta, I'm looking at old houses, like ugly buildings, all this crap. So there's something to be said about that. And the other thing that I think, or at least the sentiment that I would expect most local Montanans to have, obviously I'm less qualified than even yourself to speak on it, but it's the idea of like, don't California my Montana, or don't California my Texas, or whatever you want to say, because people have the tendency to leave a place and then try to make the place they are going to like the place they left. And it's like, that doesn't make much sense.
I hear that. I don't know if I've actually heard the exact remark. Oh, I do. Oh, strike that. We had moved in 3 months, and I was at a playground with somebody, with my kids, and I was just sitting there. And some woman is walking by, and she starts yelling out loud to the playground in general. And it was something about a dog or somebody's car was running, and she had said something, "Go back to Texas" or something like that. And a woman that was like, I think she was on the bench next to me, and she was like, "No, that's like my car. Like, it's okay. Like, I'm right here. I was just trying to, keep it warm or something like that." And I was like, "Okay." Like, she was really loud. Like the woman that was just walking by, and she's like, "You need to go back to Texas." Because strangely enough, like there seems to be more of a dislike for Texans, and this is just like my anecdotal opinion, than there is even Californians. And like I've had people try and explain it to me, but like, because I was like, I would have thought those two had been like closer, like in a more kinship way, but apparently not. And this lady's just getting belligerent, and I didn't know what to do, because it's like these two ladies arguing, and they're being loud, and finally the lady's like, I guess the aggressor, whatever that means, like says like some sort of, and my son's on my lap at the time because like he had just fallen or something, and she was like, "We can go, like again, you can just go the fuck back to Texas or something." And I was like, "Well, like I feel bad for this lady. She's getting kind of like shouted it down here at this like public place." And I was like, all I could think is like, I was like, ma'am, language. And I like point at my son who fucking hears me cuss all the time. Like I'm like widely open. And you could tell she was sort of pissed that like, one, I'd probably stuck my nose in, and two, like she probably could just tell like maybe I was a cusser anyway. Like, but she knew she was wrong at the same time, like, yeah. And so like this lady walks away, and this woman sits down who I wasn't talking to at all. I was like, "So, where from in Texas are you from?" Like just got to talk.
Was she
to
from
her.
Texas?
Yeah. Because her license plate.
Gotcha.
On the car was, and that's who like this lady was bitching at, and I was just like, so how just trying to like I don't know comfort her or whatever. Yeah. And it's what's crazy is like her husband and her, they had moved there, because he worked for the railroad, which is like a foundational part of the town. Like if there was an industry that you could work for that was, I guess more related to Montana, it would be like if there were still fur traders or trappers, and then the railroad. Like,
Yeah.
those are two things that really.
Ranchers are probably up there too.
Yes, but none of those. Probably a lot of those didn't happen until they could get livestock,
True.
somewhere on a train to sell. I'm sure they did. They ranched for yourself, or maybe a small town, but I'm sure a historian could correct us on that. But I was like, damn, I was like, this lady works with damn railroad, or her husband did, and I was like, here's this lady just like randomly like seeing this license plate and being real pissed off. So I was just like, well, I was really glad I already had my Montana tags on my
there you go.
on my car. I was like, geez, like I don't want those Washington tags on there. And
you look down and you're wearing like a Seattle Mariner shirt or something.
Yeah, man. I was
kidding,
like,
but
oh, geez.
I want to go back to what you were talking about with Jordan Peterson, and I wrote down the word useful because I really do believe, because you were talking about your self-worth, and I have I'm obviously a lot younger than you, but even in a slightly different way, I relate to that. But I think as men specifically, women as well, but like being what I believe a man needs to be as a provider and a protector. So when you're not, which is just another two words for saying useful to the family, to the society, right? So when we don't feel useful anymore, that's when our self-worth gets deflated. And then that's when, like you mentioned, it starts being like, well, what the hell am I even here for if I'm not useful? Like,
correct.
So in my relation, I'll be brief with this, but I was a college baseball player. I wanted to be a professional baseball player my entire life. That was like literally my job from the time I was 5 to 22 years old. It was like what I wanted to do. I had already convinced myself that I was going to do it. It was like a part of my identity already. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, it didn't come to fruition. And so when I stopped playing baseball, I kind of had, for a year and a half, the better part of a year and a half, until I started the podcast, really, I had this just, not emptiness, but I was just like, I had my own lawn business that I had in high school that I just kicked back up. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, nothing's useful. I'm not adding any value to society. I'm not like creating anything of any worth to anybody. I'm doing something that anybody in the world can do. But it wasn't until, kind of like you, maybe with the Stumptown Axes, it wasn't until at least this season of my life that I started the podcast and started learning something and started wanting to be better at something, that I started to gain that usefulness and that confidence and that momentum. And the rule in the Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life, that I think you're kind of getting at is the clean your room before you can fix the world, or whatever it is. Because when you clean your room, like you mentioned, when you do that task, however mundane or menial it may seem, you build a little bit of confidence, you gain a little bit of momentum, and then you continue. So I want to thank you for sharing that with such candor. I really wasn't sure where you were going with the REI story, but I was like, I'm very glad that you shared that.
Well, and not to like rain on your parade, but it's one thing I've found like from getting older is like you're gonna find that you're gonna think that you're fucking useless at different times in your life too. Like so just thinking like you accomplish this thing, even if you become the next Joe Rogan or something. You're at some point, even with that, you're gonna sit there and you're gonna be like, you're gonna be 40 years old and you're gonna say, man, it's great that I'm here, but like, what the fuck am I doing? It's gonna creep up on you, and I think like it's like doing your own resilience training. Essentially, is what you're doing, and it's I really think it's valuable because I feel some of those same kind of creeping notions at times come back to me. I'd say like all the time, but I know it, and it's like I'm hyper aware when I feel like a cloud, right? Like a little cloudiness, confusion, lack of motivation, and I treat it very seriously. But I don't panic anymore. There's no it's like, okay, this is a cycle. What do I need to do? What can I do? How can I help myself? And some of that can just be like, man, let's go for a hike. Let's drop, like none of this shit's all that important. It's at my age, it's more important to be a better parent and better partner to my wife than it is to like be pursuing, let's say, Stumptown Axes. So what can I do to be in the best shape for dinner tonight? Like, ask the kids, help them with the homework and that kind of thing. Like, what do I need to do to unfog that? Or what's, again, like, do I need to call somebody? Am I putting something off, some task? Let me just knock out one of those. And sure enough, again, you build up that momentum. I never actually read the first book, the 12 Rules or
12
whatever.
Rules for Life.
I read the second one. And he talks about slaying dragons, and I've seen a ton of that stuff online where he talks about the gold and like, you slay the biggest dragon that you can at the time, and I think that's so important. And it doesn't mean that you don't have plans for these bigger goals, and you can be developing that, but like you need to have forward progress in something. And then it can be unassociated with your main goal, but you need to be in that mindset. And still, even with all that shit, it still can not work. That's a frustrating thing. And me and my buddy Mark, who I probably reference more than others with like some of this fun discussion stuff with. You see these serial success people, these guys that are like, if you're not getting up at 3:30, I have 12 days in one day. That's how I outsmart these motherfuckers. Is like, first I get a really good haircut, I got great jeans, and then and then I dominate the day, and then look, man, most of those guys, I consider hucksters on some level, because you can have tons of success, tons of drive, be pushing all the shit, and still shit just doesn't go your way. Think of the number. You've played sports. Think of the talent that professional or even collegiate team has to view. They have the entire country, right? Now, not everyone's playing. Half of those are women, so they're not going to be playing baseball, at least up till a couple years ago. But they could view all these people. You could be a superstar, and you blow out your fucking knee. They're not going to wait on you. They don't care. They'll wait on Derek Jeter, who's proved himself, right?
Yeah.
Who's got that. They'll wait on Roger Clemens, and not only that, they'll give him drugs to get him better faster, right? They'll convince him, which, in my opinion, you should be allowed to take some of those, especially for the healing stuff. It's your livelihood. But they're not going to wait on you. And so you could do all these things right. You can hustle and manifest. I so despise some of this bullshit, because there's an ounce of truth in some of it. And that's where you can get hooked in, right? Do you need to have drive and believe in yourself and make investments in yourself? Yes, that is the truth. But all this other shit, do I need a cold plunge? Which I do actually cold plunge. Do I need that? No, you don't have to do that. Do I need to get up at 3:30 and then I meditate and then I do that and that's day one down? This kind of shit, I'm just man, that just might work for you. That's it. If you had to look at that person and how they approach things, it's probably their preferred approach. You know what I mean? It's a good fit. It's psychologically, you're built that way. While another creative person, they don't work well in that kind of environment. I lean towards that. A lot of my best ideas, I'm not that great of an athlete, but I do a lot of movement and stuff. I trail run, I ski a lot. A lot of my ideas come from doing those things. It's time on the mountain where I'm I'm even having conversations in my head or something, and I'm in a great space mentally I'm physically exhausted, and I'm like, oh, I should do this. Like, I should make this connection, or I should try this. And that has worked for me. And, of course, like, I'm not a multi-million-dollar real estate guy, but and a lot of those fucking hucksters, they've done one thing, and then now they're just selling a thing. And they got lucky on the thing. Like, what you don't see is like all the fucking guys that got the $300 jeans and the spray tans and are doing 12 days in one day that weren't successful, that tried just as hard, and they weren't as lucky. So
the first thing I want to touch on is the seasonal and the cyclical thing, because you mentioned, like, when I'm 40, I 100% am aware of that, and I think you actually just mentioned it. Being aware of the fact that life is cyclical, I think we're fed this. One of the lies that we're fed, perhaps unintentionally or programmed throughout our life, is that, like, we're trying to reach this state of perpetual happiness, which I have already in my youthfulness discovered is an absolute fallacy. Life is cyclical. It's seasonal. I'm going to have times of immense fulfillment, immense joy, immense peace. I'm going to have times of trial, times of suffering. And it kind of speaks to, like, the whole point of the podcast, the tyro experience. It's the experience of being a tyro. Tyro means novice or beginner, stems from the Latin word meaning young soldier. And I've said this literally every single podcast that I've done. So sorry to the listeners for the 30th, whatever
Screw
time.
these listeners.
Yeah. But my point is that I gain, like, a lot of comfort in not identifying as a tyro, but, like, I'm okay with that. Me and my brother joke about it all the time. Like, I'll call him a moron, and then he'll be like, "Appreciate it, man." Like, because Joe Rogan, for example,
older or younger brother?
Older brother. Because
how much older?
4 years.
Okay.
And so, like, we'll just call each other morons, or like, "Hey, yo, that was really dumb of you," and then, like, dap each other up and be like, "Congrats," just because we're fed this bullshit that we have to be, like, the smartest, we have to be the most intelligent, we have to be the best, blah 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 blah. Those are the people that I think are, like you said, they're the hucksters. They're the people that are not being truthful with themselves or the people around them. We are all tyros in one way or another. Like, we are all novices and beginners. And my goal is to become a novice or be a novice or beginner in my entire life. So it kind of has helped me in my 24 years of life thus far, specifically the last year and a half, kind of navigating the cyclicality of it all. It's helped me to understand that I want to be a novice or beginner. I'm working towards something. It doesn't mean that I'm not, like, working towards something, but understanding there's always levels to it. And the second thing I want to say about, like, the routines, because I actually think that this is one of the reasons that I am not a professional baseball player right now. And I'll explain. I was one of those guys who was always very talented. Like, from the time I was 4 years old, I was either the or one of the most athletic people on my team in every sport I played. And this is not braggadocious. That's just how it was. Like, I just picked things up easily. And so when I got to college, I wanted to be the best at baseball. So I was super neurotic. I became neurotic about my routines and dependent on my routines. And if I didn't get 8 hours of sleep, then I was not going to pitch well. Or if I didn't eat a good meal, then I wasn't going to pitch well. And it wasn't until my 5th year at VCU where I actually stopped caring. Like, it's like I just, like, freed myself of all identity with baseball, that I actually became the best baseball player that I ever was. I had the best year. I had the most fun. I enjoyed it the most. And so the reason I think that ties into what you're saying is so many people use their routines, and I wake up at 3:30, then I meditate, then I journal, and then I run 6 miles, and then I cold plunge, then I sauna, then I shower twice, and I get a haircut, and I clean shave every day. It's like, okay, like, none of that actually matters. Like, so I'm not saying those are wrong. I'm not saying that's bad. I just think that the reframe that a guy named Noah Ryan has helped me with, he said this one time: be resilient, not neurotic. So don't rely on them. You can use those things in isolation, the cold plunge, the sauna, those things. But when you become reliant on them and become neurotic about their impact on your life, they become crutches as opposed to like bolsters, I guess. That was long-winded.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there's obvious value in discipline, right? Like, there's there's certainly value in it. And, if we're looking at these hucksters that are trying to sell you, oh, if you just do this and this is the way. And I just don't think, I'd be curious, like, how many of those people were doing these routines before the success. And, and again, it's like there's probably some portion that like it. They like, they like selling their idea of like, this is how to be successful more than they like the real estate or whatever made them successful, right? Like an example would be like Gary Vee. Gary Vee's like, I think he's admitted he's probably he's a terribly competitive person. Like he seriously wants to beat you at everything. At the same time, he wants to beat you at being the most conscientious and giving person too, which is a positive thing. Like, it's like, he gives out content and gives out advice all the time. That's really good. But he also enjoys it. Like, he enjoys doing it. And, like another person, an example, like I don't make fun of him. I've never met him or anything, but like Jocko. Like, a lot of people know Jocko from podcasting and, former Navy SEAL. And he takes pictures of his watch at 4 a.m. And it's hard to get up at 4 a.m. and do a workout, and it's difficult, right? Like, I've done it, never done it on a routine like that because it hasn't needed it. But if you're going to look at a guy that is going to do something like that, you'd think it'd be a guy like Jocko, who's been in the military most of his adult life. It's not a far stretch. You're not like, if we took a guy that was 400 pounds and sloppy, and then he's getting up at 3 o'clock every morning and doing it, there's a lot of value of getting up at 4 o'clock. It's before the family gets up. To say that it's not a selfish pursuit and that it's not a good fit for a person like that, it is disingenuous on some level. I'm not saying he's a disingenuous guy. He's a super positive guy, and I really like his message and stuff. But like, I think people, especially maybe young people, like are looking for these tricks or these keys to make it easier. And the truth is, it's not easy. And you got to find what works. And sometimes different things work. And maybe the belief in yourself is probably the more important thing, but you come to that in different ways, I guess.
100%. And Jocko is an interesting case study because, so I wrote down the word temperaments. I think Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. We have different temperaments. That's like, everyone's temperament is unique to the like on the, what's the word? Everyone's temperament is unique to like the most detailed degree, but there are pools of temperaments, right? Like, they fall into a category or they align with certain categories. Somebody like a Rick Rubin, or like somebody that's really, really creative, or like a Pablo Picasso, or any of these creators that have created these insane things in humanity, they probably would be utterly miserable doing what Jocko Willink does, right? That doesn't mean that there's no value in what Jocko Willink does, but specifically for people with his temperament, it might be more valuable. I also think the more people look into Jocko and read and listen to his podcast, he's so interesting because he wakes up at 4:30 and then he goes and surfs and then he does jujitsu. So it's not like he's like this. He said he's never meditated. He never does any. So it's like he's got a balance. But one of the
but I would argue like surfing's in some ways, like if you're out there surfing, part of what you're enjoying about it is a connection. It's 100% meditative, Well, that's
the point.
Maybe not traditionally, like you've sat on the carpet in the middle of your Buddha shrine and stuff and meditated, but he's quieted his mind from surfing 100%, and quieted his mind from the exhaustion after a workout. Right? He takes a picture of the aftermath, which is like, look, I'm definitely not beating on that guy. Like, I'm just saying it's a good fit for him, and it may not be a good fit for other people. If you're asking, like, which I don't know if necessarily you were, I was just more preaching. But like, for young people, like, oh, like, how do I get into doing, my own thing or doing axes that make a difference or whatnot. You got to find what works for you and try all these different things.
Yeah.
Shit, like the definitely cold definitely helped me mentally for sure. You know, I started in Washington when I was having trouble, but even before axes was I would well, no, I guess it was during axes because a lot of times I was rinsing off dust. But in the afternoon, I would take a cold shower, which we had well water, and from the mountain that shit comes out cold even in the middle of summer, and I ended up being able to drop like a afternoon cup of coffee because I'd take a cold shower that's ice cold, and you
Yeah.
you're breathing heavy, and the next thing you know, you're like wide awake, but then so now I'm a little calmer because of this, essentially a breathing exercise. I'm a little more focused on the next. It feels like a reboot for the day, but then I'm sleeping better too, right? Because I'm not having this caffeine late in the day, right? So like, it has these secondary, tertiary effects, like a little tool like that can have. And so I'm not saying like these hucksters like. I don't necessarily mean to bash on them, but like, because there are nuggets that you could definitely extrapolate from somebody, but it just be careful because like some of these guys are like they want this idol worship and they're having these conferences and these explosions, and I think they're getting a lot of men, a lot of young men, to almost worship them, and then it's like that's a good fit. It's got to be a great feeling when people are your fans. Like shit, yeah, feels good.
Yeah.
You get recognized somewhere, you're like, hell yeah, I'm doing the right thing. And now you got to be wary of that shit too, because like that's not good for you either.
Yeah. The comment about meditating, my point about that is I think that the way he does that, for example, for me, it'd be interesting because I've had like routines where I meditate every morning, and then I've also just had meditation or times where I just go on a walk instead, and it's similar effects. So my point is that like I'm sure you've had experiences skiing. I'm sure people have experiences when they go on runs and stuff. My whole, like the number one thing that I've learned from my baseball experience until now about routines is that it is very, very important, in my opinion, to not become reliant on them and not become reliant. Like, so say you wake up at 4:30 every day, and then the 598th day you wake up at 6:15, instead of being like, fuck, today's going to be a horrible day. Yeah. Have some resilience. Don't be neurotic about it. And that can go for waking up early, cold plunging, meditating, any number of things. So my to kind of sum that up, I think you're exactly right. It is important to try. Like I think it's important to try earnestly different things. I think people they say I live a life of moderation, or I'm in the middle, but you can't really know where the middle is until you test out the extremes to some degree. And then you can better navigate the dichotomies. But my whole point and my whole philosophy on it right now as it stands is use tools as tools, not as like keep the main thing essentially. And the main thing is living a fulfilling quality life. The main thing is not to uphold your routine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like none of that shit was on my mind when I was depressed. Not like it was and I say depressed. I don't like when I was in a dark place or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I doubt I had like clinical depression, but who knows? I'm not an expert on it, so I know I was feeling down and feeling bad about myself, and yeah, like I think it's important to have acute tools in times like that where it's bad, where it's really bad, where you're really like. You have this frequency in your head and this chaos. Like one of the taglines I always use for Stumptown was passion from chaos, and just remembering, unfortunately, there's without dark, there is no light, those kinds of mantras are of some value. And you might have this internal dialogue where you're like, hey man, there's only, without the dark, there's no light, and you can tell yourself to fuck off, and and then you could deal with that, and then all right, 10 minutes went by, and all right, I'm done feeling sorry for myself. Maybe I can snap out of it for the next 5 minutes and go get this done, or help and somebody in this, even though I'm in a pissy mood, maybe I can help in some way. Again, be useful. And that's, I think you're right with this useful stuff. It's like, yeah, it's a highly desired thing. And, yeah, I think you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself, and then eventually you owe it to your family. And then when you can build on that, you owe it to the community. Maybe you owe it to your country. You know, like you can stack it.
You owe it to your tribe, whatever that is for you. Which
maybe.
is how I describe it. The to keep bringing up Jordan Peterson, but he talks about this. He talks about the order and chaos, like, of life, that they're. So here's a perfect example to tie this up. This topic, the over ritualized neurotic routines is on the far end of the order side of the spectrum. And when you get on that end, you become a tyrant. But then you have the other people that are not orderly at all, no discipline, no nothing. Those are chaotic individuals. They become nihilists, right? So there's this, it's a dichotomy that you have to operate within. And obviously you're not going to be able to walk that line perfectly all the time, but it's, at least that reframe for me has been super helpful. Understanding that it is a dichotomy. There is order, there is chaos, there is tyrant, there is nihilism. There is dark, there's light, and just trying to walk as closely in the middle as you can. But like you've mentioned several times, you got to be able to try things on either side to know where you want to walk. So, I mean, I think that's a
and
really
you said you have a move coming up, correct?
Correct. I'll be going to.
Well, so you're going to be a Texan soon.
Yeah. So I mean, my whole family's from Texas,
okay.
Except me, my brother, and my sister. So I mean, I don't consider myself a Texan, but right now, honestly, I'm kind of nomadic in a way. Like I'm at my parents' house right now for a couple weeks. I'll be in Austin for a month and a half, and then after that, I really don't know where I'll be. So it's I'm kind of floating around right now.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's the time to do it.
Absolutely.
I can't go somewhere for 6 weeks or open ended. That time in my life is gone. That just doesn't make sense, and it's not like the best use of my time. But it sounds exciting.
Yeah, that's the advice I've gotten from several men that I respect. It's kind of like, do it now, because if I don't do it now, then I'll never be able to, and that's not like a bad thing. It's just right now I have no girlfriend, I have no kids, I have I've kind of intentionally created or become a part of a job or a way to make money that allows me to do that type of thing. So I don't think it's the way I want to live my whole life. Obviously, like, I want to have a family and build roots or make roots, but right now it's just what I feel called to do, and that's kind of more or less how I got introduced to you, by going on like kind of a last minute trip with my dad to Montana. But
yeah,
I want to kind of hammer in on Stumptown Axes, man, because number one, like, I really do mean this. I haven't seen a whole ton of axes in my life, but like I'm not exaggerating. Like, the first thing I saw in that entire shop, there's a ton of cool things to look at. I walked in and looked right to the left, and there are these beautiful axes. So like, I want to ask you, what does it feel like to you when you finish an axe and you're like, this axe is perfect, or maybe not perfect, but like, you have this completed project. It's literally beautiful. There's utility in it. What does that feel like?
Well, that's a great question. I'll tell you why, because it is actually, of the whole thing, is my favorite part of the project. Is like, before I take pictures, before anyone sees it, it's just yours. And you're just sitting quietly, and sometimes I'll crack a beer or something, and like, you're just sitting with something. And personally, for me, like, I know the road to get here. Not that, like, I don't think it takes extreme skill. Like, I don't consider myself like an extreme craftsman or anything like that. It took some time. It's something I got better at. I think there are some people that won't ever get better at it because some people aren't good at stuff, but they try, and that's fine. But it's super enjoyable. It's like, it's a quiet moment where the road that you took to get here. Nowadays I know the pieces I'm making are selling, like, so it's probably 99% of the stuff I make is already commissioned. It's already going to go to somebody. So I know it's sold. There's no pressure there. And it's a selfish time. You know, it's like meditative almost, you know, and like it's probably there's some coincidence, I'm sure. I finish a lot of projects by the end of the week, right? Like even if I started the week before, you know, there's almost this delay, you know, because by time Friday rolls around, you know, I finish it at the end of the day and I can just sit there kind of with it. Not like, you know, for hours or something, but there's like a quiet 10 minutes. And then you're like, you know, you don't want to give it away. And
It's
that's
like fostering dogs. It's like fostering
100%. But there's also this part of me that knows like I've done the right job by the customer or by myself or by the brand. The fact that I don't want to give it up, and it sounds like, you know, like a big ego thing or whatever, but like I'm a fan of my own work because I know when I do a good job, I have this feeling. And but I also think it's really good for me mentally to give up the things that I make, right? Like I don't collect axes. I do more than I used to. Now I have like a small number of axes that are not for sale, that are, you know, kind of like private, I guess, or whatever. They'll actually be in Black Rifle. We're going to start putting like trading out one of the axes that will be like some of my personal axes, just to, you know, write a little note so people can see some different stuff. And you know, those guys are super nice. It all started with one of the early managers, Tanya Ramirez, who I was introduced from my good friend Alan Benedict. They run 12 Ounce Collective, who's did my. I still call him my T-shirt guy, which is a very oversimplification of his qualifications and his standing in the art world and in the multimedia marketing world. He's like I didn't know anything about him. We just got to chatting online, and he saw that I had some T-shirts and I didn't love how they turned out, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I could do this." And at the time, he had this like one kind of fancy machine in his house or in a building on his property. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'd love to do this stuff." And I just didn't know who he was or what he did. And he's, you know, ends up being a fairly famous graffiti artist and did some a lot of full account work for major brands. And, you know, like Nike was a huge account of his. You know, like he's done some huge marketing campaigns and full like support.
Did he do your logo?
No. That actually started as a
because it's a cool logo. I gotta tell you, man. It for people listening. It's like a grizzly bear holding an axe with like it's just really cool. You got to look up Stumptown Axes to see.
Yeah,
it's a cool logo.
Yeah, it started as I wanted to reproduce vintage stickers used to be on axes, and I just wanted like a lot of them involved animals. And I was like, well, Montana. It's like, let's just put the damn thing in his mouth. And I contacted somebody that had a sticker done in, and he's in the New England states. I think he's in New Hampshire maybe. And he put me in contact with his artist, who was a real artist, and he was making me this like very detailed picture. And he ended up getting another job and kind of dropped the project, but he gave me the art for free.
Oh, cool.
Because he was like, hey, well, I paid him, I think, a deposit. And he's like, hey, man, I can't finish it, but you can have what I've done, which was a large amount. But then I started realizing reproducing like it was a realistic image was going to be too difficult for the format. And so I actually had a local guy finish it in a cartoon format. And the colors, you chose these primary colors, which were the colors of my kids' plastic bowls. Like it was like these like kind of bright, colorful purples, greens, and stuff. And it ended up sticking. And and then I've had some people tweak it, like Kat Darbala, who's has her own graphic design thing, is doing some new stuff now for me to pull out that logo, to look to get just the bear and the axe like burned onto some handles potentially.
Oh,
and
cool.
potentially a hot stamp for some future projects as well, which I enjoy that. logo stuff. And then there's a Yeti that she designed to, I just give the ideas and then just sort of overly be picky, which I'm probably horrible to deal with as far as edits and stuff. Like, well, we can do this with the nail or.
Yeah, I want to go back a couple minutes again to something you just said, man. The giving it away part. I think that is so cool to hear you say that, because if you were giving something away, obviously you're selling them, but like if you were giving something to another person and you didn't feel that way, perhaps it's not something you should be giving anyway. So the whole idea that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I've mentioned it several times on the podcast recently, but like the quote, I gotta look up who said this. Maybe it was Howard Thurman or something like that. But ask not what the world needs of you. Ask what makes you come alive and give it to the world, because what the world needs is more people to come alive. And so what you just explained, and I'm having this vision of you literally sitting in your shop just cracking a beer and like almost like a cartoonish, like looking at this.
It's sort of what it is. Yeah. The lights are just so like cool. That.
I think that's so cool. Yeah, man. But it's like you're reflecting on your work, which in essence is like what you're giving to the world. So I think it's really, really interesting to hear you say that it's almost painful to give it away.
Yeah, it's a super selfish endeavor, and I know lots of friends and family. When I first started this, even first started Stumptown, they're kind of like, well, what are you doing? Like fucking axe, like nobody uses an axe anymore, really. I mean, people do, and like, what are you doing again? Like, where is this all going? Like, you're spending time doing this, and you could be doing X, Y, and Z, maybe around the house or
being more useful.
When are you going to get a real job and this kind of thing? And I slowly, you slowly have these plans in the back of your mind, and not that I'm manifesting, God damn it. Like I'm not, like it's I wasn't manifesting. I wasn't thinking it would come out of thin air, but it's like these crazy connections where you're like, it'd be cool if this happened. And like, another thing, I guess, God, we're both deserve to be on the Peterson podcast now. But another thing I would use from him, and I use to give advice all the time, is, when somebody's asking me advice, like I'd just say, like, well, what if you were giving this person advice? What would you tell them to do? And I constantly approach like problems sort of like that, like not like what I want to do, because a lot of times it's like the little painful kind of thing that you don't fucking want to do. That's annoying, embarrassing, potentially nerve-wracking, anxiety-ridden, or whatever. But it's what you would tell a friend to do. It's what the advice would be to do, and you're like, all right, I guess I gotta fucking do that now. And but that's probably the way. So like, if you're looking at like, okay, if you want to build a brand, how would you build a brand? And you'd say, well, it's got to be real. Like it can't just come out of thin air. I mean, it can in a way. This concept of Stumptown sort of came out in thin air. And by the way, Stumptown, like a lot of railroad and logging towns, is what Whitefish used to be called. That's where Stumptown comes from. And I was like, well, this is the perfect fucking name for a fucking axe company. Stump, logging, whatever. Portland's probably the best known Stumptown, but I think the first Stumptown was in West Virginia. Like they claim it, as like but you're like, dude, come on. One's on this side of the country and the other one's on that side of the country. I'm pretty sure the ones on the east came first. Yeah. But that's where Stumptown, and a lot of like companies in town still are like Stumptown Snowboards, and I think there's a real estate, there's other people that still use the Stumptown as a name. So I was like, oh, that's where the name came from. But what would you do to say, if you're going to build a brand, you got to believe in it. It's got to be sort of real, and you got to sort of live it. And like, you got to have a vision, even if you don't necessarily write it down, because I'm not a man, like a write it down journaling person, but I constantly, I obsess over these things. Or like, wouldn't it be cool if this connected? Okay. you've identified that would be cool and be valuable. How would you potentially make that happen? And then you start working that problem there. Like how, like, well, you could make your product undeniable. Like you could make it to where it's like people really want it. And that's the best way, like if you make something that somebody wants, then like it's going to get more popular. And then there's these other techniques, like obviously I've utilized social media, which has been the most valuable, obviously, because I don't have a retail location, nor do I ever really want one. It would be off brand because it would cut into my skiing time. And I'm certainly not willing to give up that. But, we joked, I think, maybe before we recorded, I don't know if we were recording yet, but like, when I moved here, I had this iPhone 6 and it was, like I like to fix things. Like I'd replace the battery, the home button, the camera, and the front screen, I think, at least twice on that. Like this is a hodgepodge of a thing. And like, finally, like the 12 was coming out and like, I think I had 300 followers on Instagram and I was, like awesome. I wonder what it's going to take to get to 800 or whatever. And, and I got this phone. I was like, oh man, this is nicer pictures. And like, it's the thing that like, this is when Instagram was still kind of like wide open and they'd be sharing. And if people liked what you were putting on there, it would show it to everybody. It wasn't like, oh, well, would you like to boost that or all these other tricks? But like, it was real important to me. And I saw people, there was one other guy oh, hold on. I got something. I thought I had airplane mode there, but yeah, I don't know why that phone is ringing. I thought I put it on earphone, but yeah. So I got there was one other guy. He was out of Australia. His name is Lance Clark, and he was taking phenomenal pictures. And he was what I had considered the best handle maker in the world. And I still probably would still say that. And he took these great pictures, and it turns out he had been like a professional photographer at some point. But more importantly, he was conveying a feeling through pictures. And I wanted to do that both in the making of the handle. I wanted the thing to convey something. And then how do I structure this photo to convey that? Because I'm not going to sit there and let me tell you how great this fucking handle is. Although I do videos and lives and stuff, but I'm not like really like, oh, you should buy this because it's so, like, it's
I
so
make
great.
the best damn axes you've ever seen.
Right. Like, and there's lots of guys that make really, high quality stuff and have upped their game and are making great content and stuff. But, this guy in particular is what I found early. And I was like, oh man. And I became, somewhat friendly with him too. We've messaged and have, emails, with each other and stuff now too. But I started focusing on like, how do I get these pictures? And having the better equipment, the nicer phone really made a difference. I didn't need an SLR but not to say that like an iPhone is inexpensive, but I was trying to stand out from other folks, especially with the photography, while the craftsmanship got better, even if I think I looked at my stuff from 3 years ago, it's significantly better, and it should be. And it may not be as noticeable to like a consumer, but ultimately, as the maker, you can't give a shit about what the consumer thinks directly. Like you can't let that influence. They're like, oh man, you need to make more of these. Like, kind of fuck off. Like I'll make what I want to make. I'm the one that made the thing and like made the brand or whatever. You can't ignore it completely, but you also have to like kind of trust your gut because as followers increase and stuff, now you're getting all kinds of noise, right? Like your followers grow and they want different things, or they think you should be doing different things, or like you're seeing somebody else's technique and then you're borrowing from that, or as we laugh about stealing, a technique or something. But as long as you're adding to it or perfecting it, I think those are fine. But or giving credit, especially like anytime I've tried to like take credit or or do something, I've always tried to give like an inspiration of where it came from and tag that kind of person. And, you know, you get lucky on a viral video or a reel, especially when reels were new. And next thing you know, like you got a ton of followers, and then there's a lot of noise. Then you really have to rely on what you're just doing in the shop and your approach to your work. And then eventually YouTube came along, which I had a YouTube page for a long time. It was a guy in Alaska that really encouraged me to Chris DeVos, I think is. I need to ask him how his name is. Chris DeVos Woodwork. He makes these phenomenal cutting board videos, and he went viral on the long format. And I put these on the short format, and one of the videos just went absolutely viral. I think we talked about it before in our chat, but one of them went to like 42 million views for a short, which, you know, like it's not the most viewed short ever or anything, but it's up there with like a reasonably. It's safe to consider it viral, I think, at 42 million. And then I did.
I think so.
And then I followed it up with like a couple others after that also were, you know, like 35 million, 30 million. Then there's like a couple in like the tens of millions. Then there's like, you know, single digit millions. And all of the same kind of video, which is where you still go back to it. And that got me monetized. And so you know, am I making some of the same stale content with that stuff? Yes, but it's still paying, you know, like, and like, look, I'm in it to make some money. People enjoy it. I'm going to get paid for it, you know, and it takes some of the relief off of the constraint of being a handmade product.
Oh, absolutely. I could see how that
because the capacity is only what I can produce, right? And it's just me. A lot of times people send me notes or, oh man, I love what you guys do, or I've heard people talk about me before, and they're like, oh, those guys up there, and it's like, no, it's just the one.
It's,
like,
yeah, it's Stumptown Axe, not Axes. It's
right.
Stumptown.
And I'm glad they think that, you know, there's a bunch of people pushing this stuff out, but you know, that's not the case. Although, you know, like I think we discussed, like I'm exploring some options for scaling and delivering a product that could satisfy a broader audience, and I think there's some room in the marketplace for that. And I'm hoping to you know, bolster some relationships that allow for that. And you know, I'm very excited. You know, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now, to report back on, you know, something like that. You know, hopefully it's almost a different animal at that point, where I'll still be doing obviously custom stuff because I enjoy it. It's something. It's still a professional hobby that I call it. You know,
not a job. That's cool. That's it.
Yeah. Well, because it's not, you know, like any illusions that I'm making, you know, millions of dollars doing this is a fallacy. Am I finally making money? Yes. You know, like it's a nice thing. Would I like to see what the brand can do? Can I give people some of the joy and experiences of having these custom pieces at a lower price point possibly, or a larger scale, or bring it to more people? Yeah, I want to see what that, if it's done right. It has to be done right. And that's the figuring. You know, how do you sort of deliver part of a handmade product to a mass amount of people? And you know, it's a problem to solve.
I've got a question for you. While you were just speaking, I actually looked it up. What would you tell yourself when you were feeling unuseful, feeling depressed or down, getting rejected from these companies, that in a half a decade or a decade, you'd have 150 million views on YouTube, you'd have almost 200,000 subscribers, you'd have 50,000 followers on Instagram, and you'd be making real money doing something that you love? What do you think that version of Paul would have said?
I wouldn't have, you know, so if I'm going back to the past, I wouldn't have not believed the guy. So like if I visited myself with a more gray beard than that I have now, like I would say, okay, okay, like I sort of believe you. Like it's hard to believe, but okay, because it's not like I get the older I get, the more optimistic in some ways I am too. It's like some people maybe like work towards pessimism, and like I guess I'm sort of a pessimistic person, but like there's also things I can totally believe because I've seen crazy things happen. You see it all the time. You're like these, it's like superstars made out of thin air. Not a thin air, because obviously they sometimes have a journey, but there's a step or a break that somebody
A quantum
gets.
leap is how one of my buddies describes them. These quantum leaps that are just improportional to the leaps before that.
So it can happen, and I do believe that. Like I do, it's so much luck. That's what like these hucksters piss me off about. I'm like, look, man, you're selling something, and yeah, you're telling basically good advice, like to get your shit together. They're in this more ultra masculine mode of like Peterson, right? Like it's a more, I don't know, bro version of that. Like that's all going to work out if you just do this thing. It's like, no, that's not fucking true. But it could. And that's what happened to them. And then they're just like, hey, just do what I did. You're like, well, you did the thing already. And that's not like that avenue of doing things is not quite as available as it was when you did it. And now you're saying like, oh, I could have done this in anything. It's like, come on. You make more money now selling your shit than you ever made from the original thing that made you rich.
There's I'm curious to know what you would tell a 24-year-old version of somebody else that's in a similar position. What advice would you give a 24-year-old guy who has the same feelings that you once had?
I would tell him it's going to be hard. Like they say, life is hard. Like it's hard. It's hard inside your head. It's hard to be alive. And it's full of lots of joy and stuff. And like, I'd almost not tell the person that much other than just follow some of your intuition. Like it's, because you got to fuck up so much when you're your age. You really do, because you don't know what's going to work for you. And I would say is like, I would look at somebody at 40 when I was your age as fucking ancient, like they're old and, probably worked in an office and like, why the fuck do I want to do that? That person looks miserable. And shit, I could say that about some of my friends, like, God damn, man, like I couldn't do what you're doing. But, yeah, just experience stuff, like you're not gonna get it right. There's very few, like my wife, she was a fighter pilot. She wanted to be a fighter pilot since she was like 10 years old. And I'm so jealous of people, in some regards, and I'm sure it's grass is greener, of people that knew what they wanted to do. I still don't know what I want to do with my life. I absolutely have no clue. I mean, I'm doing this now, and I enjoy Stumptown like no other, and I look forward to like pushing it to the next level and whatever that looks like. But I was always jealous, like people, like because I felt like it gave them better drive. It gave them more purpose for the pain, direction. Right? Yeah, it's like he's like, well, why the fuck are you doing that, man? Like that doesn't seem any fun. Like I was a horrible fucking student, and it's not that I was unintelligent. I mean, I'm not the brightest fucking bulb, but like I barely fucking passed high school. I mean, I think, and I hope she's still alive. I really think my math teacher, Mrs. Osborne, gave me a grade on my final math test to let me pass high school. I really do. I'm very suspicious about the movement of her checking this paper, and I'm standing there, and other people were standing there too, and she just puts this grade on it and turns it over and just like, go tell the counselor or something like that. Like, you did it, like, I'm like, I mean, right then I was like, I was suspicious, and like ever more now, like it was God, it was a great moral dilemma that she was in. And I think I'd like to say she made the right call. And
time will tell, I guess.
But goddamn, like if that would have cycled me into probably a very terrible way, you know, and you know, like that, you know, it was graduation day. I get a scholarship to a junior college to go play basketball, and off I go, you know, to do other mistakes and make other problems for myself. So like at 24, like, you know, they always say all these, like, I wouldn't tell you anything different than all the other fucking cliches, because some of them are true, you know, like you're going to hear like, well, you just got to go find your own way. And like, you know, like understand that like all this stuff comes with pain, and life is short. And, you know, like I like you know, as much as I make fun of some of these people, I love their message. Like I love Gary Vee's message of being, kind and to people, and gratitude. It does give you something. And, you know, you could argue maybe it gives you more of a boost than it does the other people. And sure, maybe you're cheerleading for yourself. But sometimes that's what you need. And sometimes that does still help other people. There's an axe guy I followed early on. He's a YouTube guy, Bucking Billy Ray. He's up in Canada. He's a super positive guy. And he's a real like arborist, like takes down trees and stuff. And he's got this great following, very big following, because he's so positive. And, you know, I've never met him, never talked to him. I really don't know that much about him other than like social media, but I could only imagine a guy being that positive having some pretty real negative in his life somewhere, or some sort of sadness. And God, who was it? It was like it's one of these clips where somebody was quoting somebody else, was talking about main characters, the good and evil person. God, I wish I could say who said it, but like that person was quoting another person, and they said, the evil person and the superhero have both the same upbringing. And one said, you know, the world's done this to me, and I'm going to make sure nobody does this to me. This doesn't happen to anyone else. And the other guy, the villain, says, you know, this has happened to me, and fuck, everyone's going to pay. You know, it's a horrible.
No, I know what you're talking about. I think it might have been Alex Hormozy. I don't know if that rings a bell for you, but I remember seeing a clip of Alex Hormozy saying something like that.
Yeah, but that's like, yeah, like, so I see the positivity of this guy, Buckin, and I love it. You know, he's kind of cheesy, like as you'd imagine, like this, like kind of stereotypical Canadian guy, but he really is positive. Yeah, but he's really positive, man. It's like, and like me, coming from like dark places and not always being like maybe the friendliest guy or whatever, you know, kind of mainly pessimistic, standoffish. Although, like, you know, like I hope I showed I'm pretty talkative too. But I can only look at that and say, like, man, there's got to be some sadness there. There's got to.
Well,
be
we've all got that. I think we've all got that, and that's like you mentioned, it's what we do with it. And we're pushing the 2-hour mark. I don't know how much time you've got, but there's one question that I want to ask you at the end, but I want to make a comment real quick and get your thoughts on it. Something about, to a man, I cannot speak for women, but to myself and men that I'm around, and kind of just understanding the history of axes and swords and blades and knives, something about like the decisiveness of a blade, and maybe it's hardwired into our psyche because of like our hunting and gathering backgrounds, and how blades and projectiles that were sharp quite literally dictated our survival. Something about like the sharpness of a blade, it just speaks to me. It's like a fire. It's like my eyes are just gravitated towards it. Is that something that you have noticed about yourself, or is that something that you kind of think helped or guided you towards axes, or am I alone in that thought?
In that, I would say I guess I would recognize something like that. For me, it was truly a more of a homage or a reverence for logging and the industrial age that brought me to axes in particular. That being said, I do recognize, like, I think people would say, like, the axe is a very famous tool in human history, and there is a level, and I think it would probably speak to if you have an axe, theoretically, maybe you know how to use it. And it gives you peace, right? I think that's why even people like that buy pieces from me that are like, look, all the pieces I make are fully functional, but do some of them sit on somebody's fireplace and not really get used? Yes. Some of them are super collectible that are like, you know, you're not going to go banging this thing up, you know, like maybe they have a second or third axe that does their daily job and they like this thing as any antique would be. But there's a comfort in an axe, right? Like you know that it can provide wood, you know, or chopped wood that you can build a fire from. And I think it also speaks to competency. And I don't know if you're still young, and but if you've read any of Ayn Rand books before, like Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead.
I've heard of them. I definitely need to get into Atlas Shrugged.
Well, you know, Atlas Shrugged's long, and there's a fucking monologue that's like 100 fucking pages that you can kind of skip by, and because they've fucking highlighted the whole goddamn thing, the whole book. The Fountainhead is the one to read because it's basically a shorter version and it's easier to read and it speaks to all the same kind of things. And being useful, they speak to it, and it's being competent and having competency is, I think, a powerful thing for even kids. And it's what you know, like it's the things that we want to empower my kids to feel, to make good decisions, especially even while they're young, to feel empowered to do that. And it's because, you know, you're trying to set rules and a way of thinking for them that will let them make hopefully better decisions. But there's a power in like, okay, I know how to make an axe handle. Does anyone really in modern, you know, life need me? No, absolutely not. I'm a glorified, you know, interior designer for all that's really useful. But, you know, like if we're fucking on an island somewhere and we're all dropped off, like, well, I may not be the first one voted off, you know, like, yeah. Well, that guy could build a tool, you know, like, so there's a refreshing feeling that comes from being able to do one thing good or speak to one thing, you know, like to have something to talk about that you're somewhat passionate about. So, you know, like if you know, going back, I guess if I was going to tell a 24-year-old something, think about collecting a few of these widgets in life. And it doesn't matter what they are. If you like them, somebody will find them into, like, I don't give a shit if you collect Star Wars figures, and talk about like the differences between, like, well, this is a package, you know, that's been modified or something, you know, like know something about something, you know, like, okay, well, this is how you know, like I dug deep on how a differential actually works on the rear of a car. And this is why, you know, when you get your pickup truck all jacked up and lifted, this is why you change the differential. Or, you know, like understand, you know, some components of the moving world or how you interact with the world. Or this is how to readily identify trees by their leaves, you know, and regions and why they proliferate in a particular area. You know, could be very dry stuff, but there's, you know, that it could fall into the discipline. And some of the stuff you may not like, you know, or even fall into like finding yourself being interested in it. But I think there's value in picking up some of these skills along the way. And next thing you know, you're a pretty fucking useful, knowledgeable person. You know, maybe all you do is become a Jeopardy champion. But, you know, like there could still be some, you know, learn how to tie flies, like some sort of meditative space.
Well, you mentioned it, the paraphrase, the TLDR of what you just said, in my opinion, is don't be the first person voted off the island, right? So have some level of competency that it's like, this guy needs to stick around for just a little bit longer. You know, I don't know what exactly he's going to do with this axe handle.
I don't know what it is. This axe handle shit's not going to get us, you know, yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, you go.
I just wanted to kind of tie up my thought on the axes, I really do think, because you're mentioning all these competencies, which are totally, I 100% agree with you, but maybe why I hold like an axe or even what you do in a little bit more reverence is I really do think there's something, the relationship between us as humans and specifically men who have been the hunters, and sharp objects is, there's something about that, because literally a human's ability to sharpen a rock however many thousands of years ago is quite literally the reason that we're here today. It's the reason that we were able to survive and adapt and all these things. So I just think I want to think about that a little bit more, but there's something to be said about the relationship between a guy and making something that is sharp and can be used.
Well, I think what you might be describing is like the controlled danger, right? Like you're literally wielding an object that could kill somebody. It's probably no different than some of the power that that some people feel holding a gun. Like it can do damage, but it's also a tool, right? Like so, part of the reason, wooden handles, especially handmade wooden handles, aren't fucking needed anymore. I've already covered that, but like fiberglass is probably a better material and certainly cheaper on production and all that kind of shit. But I describe it as people that like manual cars. There's a reason F1 cars are paddle shifter, because it's a more efficient and more precise way to do the thing. But some people still like driving a stick shift. And some people, this is wood. It's going to need to be maintained. So you're buying something that you're also buying into work. You're like, shit, now I got to condition this thing, occasionally, but there's joy in that. And if my message is, like a lot of people, how I put these wedges in, a lot of people are like, why don't you put the metal in there that holds it in? You're like, well, if it's done right, you shouldn't need it right off the bat. That's first of all. And will it come loose? Yeah, potentially someday. Yeah, with going in and out of cold over time. If you got it wet and then it dries out a whole bunch, if it's sitting in Arizona and then you're smacking it and abusing it, yes. But I also think there's something to be said about the competency of just maintaining your tools. It's when I was in the bike shop, there was something that felt good about maintaining my own bike, right? Like lubing my cables, lubing the chain or taking the chain off and actually soaking it and fully cleaning it and having this bike really shifting top notch the next time I'm out for a ride. It's a more enjoyable experience, And so if you're sharpening your own axe, if you're conditioning your own handle, it can give another layer of joy to the ownership of this thing, that you have.
Yeah, the fiberglass comment, this actually ties into the question that I wrap up every podcast with, but the fiberglass comment, there's no story behind that. There's no story behind a fiberglass other than a metal machine robot making some handle that very well might last longer, whatever. The way that I look at it is this is why we have heirlooms and we have antiques and we have all these things, because we're drawn towards stories. And the story you're telling, at least from my perspective of it is so much more appealing, and I want to be a part of it so much more than some damn Home Depot fiberglass axe that was made by machines and or slave labor in China or something like that, right? So the story that you're telling with your axes about yourself, about your life, and about the heritage of axes and all that stuff, I think it ties into what you're giving to the world. And how that ties into the last question is, as I mentioned, Tyro means young soldier, essentially. But what it means to me, a Tyro is somebody that's in an arena. They're picking up their sword, or their axe, I guess, in this context, and they're running towards the middle, and they're fighting for their life, because in the end, our life is a fight. It's a series of battles. So my question to you is, what arena are you in?
I am I'm selfishly trying to leave something to be, I guess, in some ways remembered by, even if it's by a few people, even if it's by my kids and my family. Like maybe my grandkids could, like, oh yeah, crazy, Grandpa Paul, he used to, you know, make axe handles for whatever crazy goddamn reason. Um, and I'm also, I guess, in the arena of sharing that feeling, sometimes fleeting, or that admiration for a different time and a very hard life. We look at it, like you look at old logging pictures and we see like, oh man, look how cool. And it was a terrible life. It's a terrible life that nobody would want to live. Nobody would want to be a logger in the 1920s. It was a miserable life in a logging camp, terrible conditions, like horrible. But we look at these pictures with reverence, like these were hard men that went out to the woods and lived there. Most of them single, most of them immigrants, trying to forge a way across the West, right? Like, because that's, as we expanded America, the need for lumber increased, and a lot of that was from the West. And so it's a selfish pursuit of sort of leaving something. I can't write a song. I'm not going to have a book, I don't think. And so I'd like to leave something, and it'll be forgotten in time. It's not like I'm making some huge impact, but like, maybe, there is joy that somebody 150 years from now, potentially, is cleaning out their grandfather's garage, and there's a nice looking axe there. And, maybe they can trace it back to me somehow. And they'd be like, oh yeah, this guy had all these videos, and, he shared, apparently he skied way more than he should have, when he should have been working on customer stuff. And, maybe they'll find some joy in it too. And they'll see like, yeah, this, maybe they'll put some oil on it, resharpen the bit, and hang it up in their house or something, and get some sort of joy from it that I have. If I can share some of the brief mental, health stuff that this helped me out of. And I'm not saying like anyone with mental health should go make axes, like, but they should go do something potentially, like there's room. And like, I was very fortunate with, my wife to be able to, support me going through this period. And, I had the freedom. I was super lucky that we didn't rely on, I didn't have to go to a 9 to 5 and then come up with this hobby. And a lot of the good friends that are great makers do that now, are not full-time makers, but they're trying to push out as much and trying to work on their brands as well. And I have a lot of respect for that. I've had a different path, and I've been super fortunate.
Right on, Paul. I mean, that's awesome, man. I can't wait to at some point get my hands on one of them. That's for sure. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I thank you for taking the time. We're well above the 2-hour mark now, so this has been a real honor.
Yeah. I enjoy, clearly I enjoy talking about this stuff and sitting back. I think you're going to be successful with this. I think I enjoy it. It's going to be ups and downs, but what else are you going to do? Go work in a cubicle right now? Like, that's not necessarily it's not necessarily a good path either. Although you got to put in your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's another discussion. Maybe part 2, what we'll do is I'll, if you're open to it, I'll make my way up back to Montana. We'll do it in person. Yeah, absolutely. We got some great backdrops to do it. Right on. Thanks, Paul. All right. And with that, I hope y'all enjoyed the conversation with Paul. 2+ hours, another really valuable conversation for myself. I hope you guys found some value in it. Follow Paul everywhere. Stumptown Axes, YouTube, Instagram. YouTube, he's got 200,000. Instagram, he's got 50,000+. Go to his website, stumptownaxes.com. Support him, man. He's a small business owner making things that are going to last a long time in America. So support him, follow him. Also follow him on Twitter. He just started Twitter, Stumptown Axes as well. So hope y'all found some value in it. Until next time, stand firm in the arena.